It's weird how you don't notice the moment things turn bad. There's no alarm bell or flashing red sign. It just creeps in slowly like mold in the corners of your life. I used to tell myself Logan was just intense, like it was some kind of compliment. But the truth is, I stayed way past the expiration date. I let it rot. Logan wasn't always horrible. That's what makes it complicated, right? There were times he'd hold my hand tighter when we walked past shady streets in Claremont, or walk me home when it was dark and the neighborhood felt heavy. He was a big guy. People moved out of his way. I liked that, especially where we live. The streets don't feel safe when you're alone and female, and I told myself being with someone like him was better than being by myself. I thought I needed that kind of protection, but then that same strength started turning on me. Not always physical. At first it was just the way he talked, like I was stupid, like I should be grateful to even be with him. He made me feel small in a way I can't even fully explain, like I was just this thing he owned. I hated it. I hated myself for putting up with it. Leaving wasn't some brave movie moment either. I didn't pack a bag or scream, "I'm done." I just sat on my bed and sent a text. Just a sentence. That's all I could manage. The second it sent, my phone lit up, call after call. I couldn't bring myself to answer. I already knew the tone I'd hear on the other end. I didn't even notice it at first. I was just unlocking the door like I always do, juggling my bag, half awake, probably thinking about coffee. But then I saw it. This dirty, crumpled piece of paper jammed between the doorframe and the molding, like someone had forced it there. It wasn't folded neatly. It wasn't in an envelope. It looked like trash, honestly, but I pulled it out anyway. The handwriting hit me before the words did. Sharp, messy, almost like it was written in a rush but with purpose. And I didn't even need to read more than a few words to know it was from him. Logan didn't sign it, of course. He didn't have to. It read just like one of his late-night rants. Only this time it wasn't coming through a screen. It was in my hand, in front of my door. That changed the whole feeling of it. There was something about the way the ink was pressed deep into the paper, like he'd dug the pen in. Threats, accusations, weird, twisted versions of things I never said. Stuff that made me feel gross just reading. Like he wasn't just angry. He was unraveling. My mom freaked when I showed her, said we should report it, but I couldn't even imagine that conversation with the cops. "Hey, my ex wrote a scary note in bad handwriting. No, there's no camera footage. No, I didn't see him." I ended up stuffing it in the back of my drawer, thinking maybe if I ignored it, it would mean less. But it didn't. All day it sat in my head like static. Just the thought of him walking up to our door, getting that close again. It made my skin crawl. There's a certain kind of silence that makes your skin feel too tight, like the walls are holding their breath. That's the kind of night it was. I knew Mom wouldn't be home until late, her second shift at the clinic running long, so it was just me. The house wasn't loud, but my brain was. I kept lying there, trying to slow it down, but it wouldn't let up. Everything felt loud inside my head. Logan, the note, that twisting anxiety in my gut. At some point I must have dozed off. Not real sleep, just that floating place where you're still halfway listening to the world, and that's when I heard it. A soft creak, not loud enough to be dramatic, but sharp enough to make me open my eyes. I stared at the ceiling for a second, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Old houses make sounds. Pipes shift, floors settle. But then I sat up. There was something too specific about it. Too placed. I checked the clock. Just past 2 a.m. still hours until Mom would be back. I got out of bed and opened my door, trying not to make a sound. The hallway was pitch black, and the air felt colder than it should have. I walked out slowly, expecting maybe I'd see her bag on the counter or her shoes by the door. But the place was still. Lights off. Her car wasn't in the driveway. I walked around, flipped on the light, checked the locks. They were fine. The deadbolt, the chain, all untouched. But none of it made me feel any better. That sound hadn't been in my head. I knew what I heard. Something. It's strange how your brain will skip right past the most obvious thing when you're scared. I'd already walked through the whole house, turned on the lights, checked the locks twice, even looked out the front window like I expected to see something, or someone just standing there. But it wasn't until I got back into my room, sat down on the edge of my bed, that it hit me like a punch in the chest. The key, we'd always kept a spare in the backyard. It was just this thing we did growing up, tucked under a loose tile behind the shed, in case either of us ever forgot our keys. It never felt like a big deal, until it was, because Logan knew about it. I remember showing him once casually, like it meant something to let him in on the secret. It felt normal back then. But now, I couldn't stop seeing his face, the way he watched when I lifted the tile. I knew he remembered. And once that thought started, it didn't stop. My eyes kept jumping to the door. Every creak, every shadow, every shift of light under the crack made my heart skip. What if he was already in? What if that noise I heard earlier wasn't nothing? What if he was just waiting? I grabbed my phone with shaky hands and texted Mom. Then I called her. She said she'd be home soon, told me maybe I was just anxious, that I needed to breathe. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, but I didn't believe it. My brain wouldn't let go of that one thought. He could be inside. He knew how, and the silence suddenly felt like a setup, like something was about to move. I think my brain was just grabbing at anything that felt normal. When I came back into the room, there was Miso right where she always liked to be, perched at the edge of my bed like this tiny little sentry. It actually made me feel better for a second. I remember thinking, if something was really wrong, Miso would have reacted. That thought calmed me. I even smiled a little, but when I reached out to pick her up, everything went wrong at once. She didn't move. Her body was too still, too stiff, like something frozen. I pulled my hand back like I'd touched something burning, even though she wasn't cold. Her eyes were open, wide open, but they weren't following me like they usually did. They weren't blinking. They weren't doing anything. That's when my stomach dropped. I didn't want to believe it. I sat there for a minute just staring at her, whispering in my head that maybe she was just in shock or asleep, weird, or something else that made no sense. But deep down I already knew. She was gone, and that's when everything sharpened. All the creeping feelings from earlier, the noise, the key, the note, it all snapped into one horrible picture. Someone had been in my room. Someone had touched my cat, and I knew exactly who it had to be. I locked my bedroom door with shaking hands, like that would somehow undo what had already happened. I grabbed my phone and called 911. I didn't even care if I sounded crazy. I whispered everything, my voice barely coming out, but every second after that felt like it could be the second he came back. It's like my body made the decision for me. One minute I was staring at Miso, trying not to fall apart, and the next I was curled up on the floor of my closet, phone clutched tight, whispering into it like any sound above a breath might get me killed. I stayed on the line with the 911 operator the entire time. She kept asking questions, telling me to stay calm, but my answers felt far away, like I was translating them from another language. The worst part wasn't even the waiting. It was the not knowing. I had no idea if Logan was still there. He could have been in the hallway, in the living room. Hell, maybe he was already in my room before I even got back in bed. Maybe he saw me discover Miso. Maybe he was watching me panic, and I'd never know. I didn't hear the front door open, which made it worse. But then someone shouted, a man's voice saying they were police. I stayed frozen for a few seconds, still unsure if I could trust it, but the operator confirmed it. They were there. They said the front door had been unlocked when they got there. I hadn't unlocked it. I remember checking that door, so either Logan never bothered locking it behind him, or he came back, or maybe he never left. I still don't know. Mom got home right after that. Everything became noise. We showed them the note, the texts, even Miso, but it wasn't enough. No broken windows, no marks on her, no prints, just nothing they could use. It felt like screaming into a void, like the world glanced at what happened and said, that sucks, then moved on. It should have brought peace, right? New locks, fresh start. That's what everyone says. But all it did was remind me how easily someone can undo whatever safety you think you have. When I checked, the spare key was still there, right where it always was, under that loose tile. That broke me a little, because either Logan never touched it or he put it back. And somehow, that second option felt so much worse, like he was trying to prove something, that he could come and go as he pleased, that I had no real control over who got in and out of my life or my house. We filed for a restraining order not long after. My mom handled most of the paperwork because I couldn't even think straight. The judge gave us a temporary one, and when we showed up to court, they made it permanent. Logan didn't say a word that day, just stared. I avoided looking at him, but I could feel it, that pressure, that presence, and that was the last time I saw him. At least I think it was. But the thing is, even now, I can't stop thinking about that night. That moment I first got out of bed, wandered into the hallway, called for Mom. What if he was already inside then? What if he was in the corner of the room, or just behind the door, holding his breath, watching me walk around thinking I was alone? That part never leaves me. It's not the break-in or the threats that keep me up. It's the space between moments, all the little pieces of time I'll never get back, where something could have been happening just out of sight, and I'll never know. So, I met Lena on Bumble, nothing special about that. Just one of those random right swipes you don't think twice about until it turns into something. What caught my attention was that we both went to Westport University. That was an easy opener. I think we joked about some professor everyone hated, or maybe a class we both struggled through. Honestly, I don't remember the details, and that kind of says everything. It wasn't fireworks or anything, it was just easy. That's what made it feel real, I guess. There was no pressure, no awkward small talk. We just clicked. She had this chill energy at first, super laid back, funny, kind of sarcastic, which I liked. We hung out on campus a few times, grabbed coffee, walked around after class, that kind of thing. I thought it was going somewhere, and it didn't take long before it was official. 1 month in and we were already calling each other boyfriend and girlfriend. Looking back, I wonder if it all moved a little too fast. At the time, it felt like one of those rare things you don't question, you just go with it. You tell yourself, finally, someone normal. But now that I replay it, I keep asking, was it actually normal, or did I just want it to be? I remember thinking it was kind of nice how naturally everything was falling into place. But sometimes the things that feel too easy are just the quiet before it all goes sideways. And with Lena, yeah, it went sideways, fast. It's hard to pinpoint the exact moment when things changed. It wasn't some big dramatic shift. It was slow, almost like fog creeping in, until you can't see what's right in front of you anymore. 1 minute we were just two people who clicked on Bumble, hanging out between classes, sharing playlists and half-eaten bagels. Then suddenly, it was like I couldn't move without her watching. At first, it was little things. She'd ask where I was going, which was normal. I mean, couples check in, right? But then it turned into needing constant updates. If I didn't reply to a text in under 10 minutes, she'd start blowing up my phone. I'd be out with friends, just unwinding, and come back to this flood of missed calls and messages. Half of them were, "Are you okay?" and the other half were accusing me of ignoring her. I kept making excuses for her. Maybe she was just insecure. Maybe some ex really messed her up. She told me more than once that she didn't really have many friends, and yeah, that seemed true. I only ever heard about one girl she sometimes hung out with, and even that sounded strained, so I figured maybe I just had to be extra patient. But the mood swings, man, they were something else. 1 second she was sweet, the next she was pissed off that I hadn't told her I was grabbing lunch with my roommate. It started feeling like I was doing something wrong even when I wasn't. And the weird thing is, I didn't even realize how messed up it was until much later. At the time, I just kept asking myself, is this normal and I'm overreacting? Or is this actually getting bad? Turns out, it was already bad. I just couldn't see it yet. It started out like any other chill night. I was at Jason's place. Nothing crazy, just a few drinks, some old college stories, background music that kept getting louder as the night went on. I wasn't even planning on staying that long, but 1 beer turned into 4, and before I knew it, we ended up at some dive bar down the street. One of those spontaneous nights where time stops mattering. I didn't tell Lena, not because I was hiding anything, but because I already knew what kind of storm I'd walk into. The second she'd find out I was at a bar without her, it would be another emotional meltdown, Another string of texts accusing me of things I hadn't even thought of. I figured I'd deal with it later. Never thought she'd beat me to it. When I pulled into the driveway at my dad's house, there she was, just standing there in the dark, like she'd been waiting for hours. I remember the way my stomach dropped, like I'd just stepped into something I couldn't undo. Her face, it wasn't just angry, it was something else, something feral. She came at me screaming, shoving, fists clenched. I couldn't even make out half of what she was saying, something about betrayal, about me lying, about how I must have been with someone else. It was chaos. Full-blown public scene, right there in front of my dad's place, lights coming on in neighboring houses. I just kept thinking, how did it get here? This girl I met on a dating app, who used to send me dumb memes and talk about how much she loved dogs, now she was clawing at me like I ruined her life. That should have been the final moment for me, but it wasn't, and I still don't know why. I thought once I cut things off, that would be the worst of it. Maybe a few bitter texts, maybe some passive-aggressive Instagram posts. I didn't expect it to follow me into places that had nothing to do with her, especially not work. But a couple weeks after that blowout night, my supervisor pulled me into one of those stiff, overly polite meetings that immediately set off alarm bells. He said there'd been a complaint. An anonymous email said I'd been making coworkers uncomfortable, crossing boundaries, harassing people. I remember just sitting there, feeling like the air got sucked out of the room. My brain went blank. It didn't make any sense. I kept to myself at work, always had. The stuff in the email wasn't even believable, but it was specific. It had details about where I sat, the name of someone in a completely different department, even a weird reference to something I'd posted months ago. That's when I knew. It had to be Lena. I couldn't prove it, of course. HR did their thing, asked some questions, found nothing, and eventually told me it was all resolved. But it didn't feel resolved. Not in my head. I started second-guessing everyone around me, like, did they know? Were they looking at me different now? Was this going to stick with me, even if it wasn't true? It was the first time I realized how easily someone could just reach into your life and screw things up from a distance. No warning, no proof, just pure chaos dropped in your lap. I kept asking myself, what kind of person does this? But deep down I already knew the answer. It was her. It was always her. Blocking her felt like the only move left. I wiped her off my socials, blocked her number, deleted old texts, like maybe that would delete the whole mess from my life. It gave me a few days of quiet, and I started to think maybe, just maybe, she'd moved on. But that silence, it was fake. It was just a pause before things got worse. Then the burner numbers started. Random area codes I didn't recognize. Sending paragraphs that shifted tone mid-sentence, first saying she missed me, then calling me a liar, then something completely unhinged like accusing me of trying to erase her existence. I'd block one, and another would pop up. Then came the emails. Whole rants about how I'd ruined her life, how I owed her closure, how no one had ever made her feel like this. I'd read one line and feel sick, and the weirdest part? It didn't even feel like the same person anymore. She'd swing from heartbreak to rage to this eerie calm, like she was just cataloging every thought in her head and dropping it in my inbox. I stopped checking after a while, but then my friend sent me this screenshot. Lena had posted a new picture, her and this guy Derek, big guy, the kind of guy you instinctively don't make eye contact with. And there she was, all smiles like nothing had ever happened. I laughed at first. I even made a joke like, guess she upgraded. But part of me felt something shift, like that wasn't just a new boyfriend. That was a move. A warning maybe. I don't know. Looking back, I should have taken it more seriously. Way more seriously. I still remember that night too clearly. It was one of those late, dead quiet nights where everything's still and you feel like the world's finally left you alone. I was just lying in bed, scrolling mindlessly, barely awake. Then came this pounding, like full-on fists slamming against the front door. Not knocking, not subtle, just pure force. At first I didn't move. I actually thought maybe I imagined it. I wanted to believe it was something else. A package drop, some drunk neighbor, anything. But then came the yelling. Loud, raw, angry, and it was directed at me. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. Threats, accusations, stuff about opening the door before he breaks everything I own. That's when the glass shattered. The sound of it hit harder than the pounding did. I knew exactly what it was. My SUV, all the windows, one by one. I got up, heart racing, and peeked through the blinds. And there he was. Derek, the guy from the photo, just casually destroying my car like it was part of his evening routine. He looked bigger in person, angrier too. I don't even remember dialing, just that my hands were shaking while I whispered everything to the dispatcher. I don't know why I whispered. It's not like he didn't already know I was home. It just felt like the only thing I could do to feel in control. He didn't even flinch when the red and blue lights hit the street. Just stood there shouting like the cops were some inconvenience. Like he wasn't the one caught mid-rampage. And I stood there behind the window, still trying to make sense of how any of this was real. I kept thinking I should have called sooner. Way sooner. After the cops took Derek away, the whole thing felt like a dream I hadn't woken up from yet. Filing the restraining order should have felt like some kind of relief, like I was finally taking control. But all it did was make everything feel more real and somehow more confusing. One for her, one for him. Legal distance that still didn't feel far enough. Out of some mix of anger and desperation, I unblocked Lena. I just needed to know. What did she say to him? What story did she spin that made a guy I'd never met show up ready to smash my windows in and threaten my life? Her response? Blank confusion. Said she didn't know what I was talking about. No acknowledgement, no explanation, just this fake innocence that almost felt like mockery. And I started thinking, was she lying? Or had she actually convinced herself of whatever story she told him? Had she painted me into some monster in her head and just believed it? I can't explain how frustrating it is to not know what version of you is living in someone else's mind, especially when that version almost got you killed. I sent her one last message, dumped everything into it, told her she needed help, told her to stay away. That was it. No reply. But the next day, like clockwork, her Instagram posts with Derek were gone. I haven't heard from her or him since. But that doesn't mean I stopped looking over my shoulder. I still check the locks twice, still flinch when an unknown number calls. And the worst part, I still find myself trying to piece it together, what exactly I missed and when the whole thing quietly slipped off the rails without me seeing it. I still don't even know why I answered that DM. It was one of those late night scrolls. You know when you're half asleep and tapping through messages, and suddenly you're talking to someone you've never met. That was Jake. His profile pic was kind of rugged, like he knew what angles worked for him. He looked older than a high school senior. Definitely didn't go to my school. Said he lived the next town over. At first, I figured whatever, nothing serious. I didn't even think it would go anywhere, but he was actually persistent in this quiet, confident way. Not pushy exactly, just always there, sending memes, asking about my day. I didn't think much of it until he showed up at one of my volleyball games. He stood way in the back, didn't talk to anyone, just watched. Afterward, he said I played great, but I remember feeling weird, like how did he even know where to sit? We started hanging out more after that. Nothing big, no dinners or movies or anything official, mostly burritos, driving around or chilling at his house. His parents weren't around much, and I wasn't really allowed to have people over, so his place became the usual spot. We'd listen to music, talk, sometimes just sit in silence. He liked silence more than most people. Looking back, I can't say there was a moment where I felt like we were really together, but I think maybe he did, like I was still in that casual teenage daydream mindset, but he was already locked in. Sometimes I wonder if that's where it all went wrong, if I mistook laid back for harmless. But you don't notice red flags when you're not even looking for them yet. You only see them later, when it's too late to unknow who someone actually is. I don't think there was one single moment where I made the decision. I wish there was, honestly. Something clean to point to and say that's when it all changed. But it didn't happen like that. It was this slow, quiet fade, like a balloon leaking air you didn't even realize was deflating until it's just limp and sad in the corner. Jake started feeling heavier, Not physically, emotionally. Every interaction started carrying this weird tension, like if I didn't respond fast enough to a text, it meant something. If I posted something and he wasn't mentioned, he'd ask why. If I went a little quiet for a day, he'd press. Not angrily, at least, not at first. Just intensely. I kept telling myself it was just how he showed he cared. But it started wearing me down. And then there was Logan. I wasn't trying to cheat or play anyone. Logan was just this kid in my class who made everything feel lighter. We joked around, passed notes when the teacher wasn't looking, just harmless stuff. But it was the first time I noticed how different things felt. With Jake, I was always performing, always aware of what I was saying, how I said it, what mood he might be in. With Logan, I was just me, no filter. And I think that's when I realized how exhausted I was. There was no dramatic turning point. No big fight. I think I just slowly started leaving, emotionally at least. Like I was still physically there, still replying to Jake's texts, still agreeing to hang out, but my mind was already drifting toward what it would feel like to just not be with him. And that scared me, because once you start having those thoughts, it's hard to pretend everything's fine. I replay that night more than I want to admit. But the truth is, it's all kind of a blur. Not like I was drunk or anything. I wasn't. It was just one of those moments where everything feels like it's happening underwater. Muffled. Slowed down. Detached from reality. I remember texting him, asking if he could pick me up because I wanted to talk. I don't even know why I thought doing it in person was the right thing to do. Guilt. Maybe. Or some dumb hope that if I explained it the right way, he'd understand. But from the second I got in his car, I knew that wasn't going to happen. He was already tense, gripping the wheel too hard, jaw clenched, barely looked at me. I think I tried to be calm. Looking back, maybe I was too calm, like I was rehearsing it in my head so much that I forgot to actually feel it. I told him I needed space, that I felt the spark fading, that it wasn't about anyone else. But the more I talked, the more he unraveled. His voice got louder, sharper. He slammed the steering wheel hard enough that I jumped, and suddenly we were moving, only not toward home. That part's clear. We were driving through streets I didn't recognize, and I started realizing I had no idea where we were going. He wasn't talking anymore, just breathing heavy, jaw locked. I remember thinking, do I jump out now? Will I get hurt? When he finally pulled over on some road that felt like the middle of nowhere, I didn't hesitate. I opened the door and got out. Fast, he called after me, but I didn't look back until I had my phone out, already calling my mom. I still don't know where he planned to take me, or what he thought was going to happen. It was such a normal night. I was just walking over to Logan's, 2 blocks, maybe 3 minutes max. I wasn't even thinking about Jake anymore, or at least I hadn't been. Not until I noticed the figure across the street, hoodie up, hands in his pockets. That slow, deliberate walk. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was being dramatic. There are a million guys in this town with black hoodies, right? But then I noticed he was matching my pace. Every time I sped up just a little, he did too. Not immediately, just enough to make it feel like it wasn't a coincidence. And then he crossed to my side of the street. That's when my chest tightened. That weird cold panic kicked in. Like my body knew something before my brain could even catch up. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I kept walking, faster now, but not enough to make it obvious I was scared. My fingers were fumbling with my phone, trying to text Logan to come outside without making it too obvious. I didn't want to break into a full sprint unless I had to. But then I heard it, shoes hitting pavement behind me, picking up, gaining. That's when I ran. I don't remember making the decision. I just moved. I think I screamed, but it didn't register until I saw Logan run out onto his porch, confused and barefoot. And just like that, the guy behind me, he was gone. Took off the other direction like none of it even happened. But I know that gait, that posture, the way he moved his arms when he ran, I swear it was Jake. But I couldn't prove it. And honestly, sometimes I still question whether it was all in my head. But that run, that terror, that was real. At first, I thought it was over. After that night outside Logan's, I figured maybe that was Jake's way of saying whatever he needed to say, just by showing up and scaring the life out of me. But it didn't stop. It just changed. The calls started first, blocked numbers. A couple times a night, always silent. No breathing, no background noise, just that awful, quiet line. Like someone wanted me to know they were there, but didn't want to say anything. I'd let it ring, or sometimes I'd answer out of frustration, but it was always the same. Nothing. And then came the texts. They weren't threatening, not exactly. Just short, vague messages. Things like, still think about you or saw you today. Stuff that on its own wouldn't raise alarms, but in context, it chilled me. Because I didn't know if he was actually nearby or just messing with me. Once I swear I saw his car parked 3 houses down from mine. Same dull red paint. Same dent on the bumper I always teased him about. The engine wasn't running, but it was just there. No one inside. I didn't even go to the window. I just sat on my bed holding my phone, staring at the wall until the headlights eventually flicked on and drove away. My parents started picking up on the shift. I wasn't eating much. Kept checking the locks. I think my mom asked me 3 separate times if I was okay. But how do you explain something that makes you feel crazy? That maybe he's just being dramatic, or maybe he's dangerous. Either way, you can't prove it. You just feel it in your skin. It wasn't loud anymore. It was quiet. And somehow, that felt worse. It had been a while since the last weird message or call, and I guess I started letting my guard down. I stopped checking over my shoulder as much. Started telling myself he'd finally gotten bored or moved on. That was the lie I needed to function, especially at work. I was doing a weekend shift at the smoothie place, just zoning out and blending bananas for minimum wage. I hadn't thought about Jake all day until I looked up. He was there, just standing near the front, not doing anything, not ordering, just there. Eyes flicking toward me, then the menu, like he was trying to make it look casual, but I knew how he stood when he was pretending. His body always gave him away, too stiff, like he was barely holding it together. I tried to stay behind the counter, praying he'd leave, but he didn't. He waited, didn't even pretend to look at his phone. I kept glancing at the clock, counting down until my shift ended, and when it finally did, I hoped, stupidly, that he'd be gone. But the second I stepped outside, there he was, blocking the sidewalk. I tried to pass him, but he moved right in front of me like it was all some planned choreography. He started talking. Something about how we never had closure, about how he still thought we had a chance. I honestly couldn't even register the words. My mind was stuck on his hand, his fingers wrapped around my wrist. Not tight, just claiming. I froze. It wasn't until one of my coworkers came out with a trash bag and looked at us that Jake finally let go, like the spell broke. I didn't say anything, just turned around, went back inside and locked myself in the bathroom. I sat on the floor, not crying, not shaking, just numb. I stayed there for 10 minutes, maybe more. I think I was unraveling by that point. I wasn't sleeping right. I was jumping at every blocked call, every car that idled too long near our street. And then one night, without saying a word, my dad told me to get in the car. I didn't even ask where we were going. Maybe I didn't want to know. When we pulled up in front of Jake's house, it hit me. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to see him. But my dad told me to stay in the car, and something about the way he said it made me listen. I rolled the window down just a crack and sat there, heart racing. I could hear it before I saw it. My dad's voice raised, sharp, in a way I hadn't heard before. I think Jake's parents were caught off guard. I don't know what they thought was going on, but they definitely didn't expect that. My dad wasn't threatening, not exactly, but he said enough. I caught words like harassment and police, and that was enough to make it real. Like someone had finally named what was happening. I didn't see Jake. I don't know if he was inside, hiding, listening. Part of me wonders what he thought, if he was scared or if he just didn't care anymore. But after that day, nothing. No more calls, no weird texts. He disappeared like someone flipped a switch. And honestly, that's almost worse, because it makes you question everything. Did he really stop, or is he just waiting? Sometimes I still see cars that look like his and feel my chest tighten. I wish I could say it was over, but the truth is, I'm not sure it ever really is.